Good afternoon. I am al-Aziz, the owner and head instructor of Semper Fortis Jiu-jitsu here in San Antonio, Texas. And I'm here to address this week's question of the week, which came from my friend Royal via Facebook. And his question was, what are my thoughts on higher belts tapping to lower belts when sparring, or as we call in jiu-jitsu, rolling? What are my thoughts about if, say, a blue belt is able to catch and submit a purple belt in training, or a white belt, submits a purple belt in training, or a purple belt submits a black belt in training, or, any combination of that. And the short answer is I'm absolutely okay with it, because the key word is we're just training. And when you train, you should be training to get better, not training as if, hey, we're fighting for the world championship. So your jiu-jitsu training, when you spar, you should be working on techniques to get better at jiu-jitsu. So a lot of times, like for myself, I will start rolls off and allow my training partner to start in top side control or in mount. And they're on top in mount. And I'll start the roll from there, because I've trained like that for years, and the reason I train that way is I want my training partner to expose weaknesses in my side control defense or in my mount defense, or I'll let them get to my back because I want to use maybe a new back defense, and I want to see, can my training partner submit me, or can I escape using this new defense? What are the holes in my defense? And so when I look at all my belts and all my students, I look for them to do the same thing. I'm not looking for, when I watch my students roll, I like to see them execute techniques. But if they get caught with a tap by a lower belt, so what? It's training. That's the purpose of training, is to experiment, to get better. So when I'm rolling with white belts benefit me in rolling because I experiment on them. I'm not bringing my A game when I roll with a white belt in my school. I'm trying a new sweep that maybe I learned, or maybe I'm trying a new escape that, I haven't been able to really perfect, but, I want to add it to my game, or maybe I'm trying a new takedown. And sometimes when you're experimenting, it's successful, and sometimes when you experiment with a new technique, it's unsuccessful. So it could go any number of directions, but you're not going to get better in training if every time you roll, every time you spar, you bring your A game. You're fighting every roll as if you're fighting for the world championship. So that's going to really limit, your skill set, because you're going to have your go-to moves. So maybe you know 10 sweeps, but your go-to sweep, you got one. And so that's the only one that you'll really be good at, or your go-to submission, just this one submission. And so if you're always bringing your A game, then you're not going to progress. It's going to hinder your development. So you should experiment. And when you're experimenting, if it doesn't go well and you get tapped, who cares? That's what training is for. So that's why in jiu-jitsu, it is considered rude and unacceptable for anybody to even talk or brag about who they submit in training, because it's a non-issue. You're training. And so in training, you should expect, to get tapped, especially if you're getting good. So like when I train with somebody, they're able to tap me, man, I fist bump them. I'm happy about it because they exposed a weakness in me that I know I need to fix. So that's going to make my jiu-jitsu better. And then, I'm able to see that, man, this dude is getting, or this lady is getting better. Like they really executed the technique. And one of the things to keep in mind is jiu-jitsu works. And so if a white belt, locks on a rear naked choke on maybe the best competitor in the world right now is, say, Gordon Ryan. Say he locks a rear naked choke on Gordon Ryan, and he has it properly and everything's sunk in. Well, Gordon's going to have to tap. That doesn't mean Gordon's not the best no-gi grappler in the world. It just means, jiu-jitsu works. So if you get the submission and it's locked in, it doesn't matter who it's on, if you do it right, your opponent has to tap. Now the challenge, say with a Gordon Ryan or a Royce Gracie or an Andre Galvao, it's like getting that submission. Like how do you get to that position that you lock that on? That's going to be a problem. But if you're able to lock it on, and something happens and it just works out, well, your training partner will have to tap. And so that happens in training. And so it's not a big deal. And that's the culture that I want in my gym, is all my higher belts know that, hey, if you tap, it's no big deal. You're just training. And I think when gyms or martial arts schools, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu schools, foster an environment where it's unacceptable for higher belts to tap to lower belts, what ends up happening is you get a lot of aggressiveness on the mat, which can be a good thing or a bad thing, but also you'll get people who won't train if they're not 100%. So let's say I have a purple belt and he's coming back from knee surgery. Maybe he won't train even though he's healthy now because he's not 100% yet. And, like he don't want to get tapped by the blue belts because, well, then, the culture in the gym is that that's unacceptable. So you don't want that to be a part of the culture of the gym. And you're also going to have situations where people get older. Like in a couple months, I'm going to turn 53. And you don't see 53-year-old Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world champions in the adult division. It just doesn't happen. You don't see 53-year-old champions in MMA. It's just not going to happen. There's no UFC 53-year-old champion. There's no boxing 53-year-old champion. You're not seeing football players, basketball players, baseball players at 53 still excelling, performing at the top. So as a practitioner gets older, size, strength, athleticism, your skills, you still know the techniques, but you will start getting tapped by stronger, more athletic training partners, and it's just going to happen. So you can do one of two things. Either you keep training because you love jiu-jitsu and you still want to get better despite your physical limitations, or you stop training. And you see that in some schools where you'll go to schools and it'll be like, oh, the black belt doesn't roll with anybody? Why is that? Is he injured? No, he doesn't roll anymore. And that's usually because Father Time has started to take its toll on his body, and he's just not able to train at the level he used to train at. And maybe junior belts are now able to get him. And that doesn't mean that instructor is not still a great instructor. Like, for example, I mentioned Gordon Ryan earlier. I think Gordon Ryan in no-gi is one of the best no-gi grapplers ever. He's definitely the best in the world right now. He's a phenomenal talent. But his coach is John Danaher, who is significantly smaller, definitely older than Gordon. And I'm sure Gordon Ryan, if he rolls competitively with John Danaher, can beat John Danaher. I think that's pretty much a given. So that doesn't mean that Gordon doesn't still need John Danaher to be his coach. That Gordon can't continue to learn from John Danaher, because John Danaher knows a lot of jiu-jitsu and has a great mind for teaching jiu-jitsu, great ability to teach jiu-jitsu and to help his students develop. So that's why Gordon Ryan still has John Danaher as his coach, because he doesn't know it all. There's still more he can learn and more development he can get from his coach, John Danaher, even though, and I've never seen, the two train in the gym, but even though I feel quite confident in saying that Gordon Ryan could probably defeat and tap out John Danaher if they competitively grapple. But that's not a hit on John, and that's not a hit on Gordon. That's just, there's a difference in their size, strength, athleticism, in Father Time. And so it's not a hit on your coach, so you'll still learn from your coach. So don't get caught up in worrying about, who taps who, and just know that you'll continue to get better. And so don't worry about, did a lower belt tap a higher belt? It's not a problem. And you want these lower belts, or higher belts, working on different techniques to perfect them. And also, keep in mind that, like you have people like, say, Khabib Nurmagomedov, who is a guy who doesn't do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but he was a world champion Sambo fighter, world champion MMA fighter. So Khabib, although he's technically a white belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, could probably do quite well against any black belt or brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So sometimes people will come with a previous skill set. Like I remember there was a big deal in the ADCCs in the no-gi a year or two ago, where a blue belt was tapping out some black belts and ended up finishing third in the ADC no-gi. But one of the things that they sort of left out in the conversation is that blue belt was an accomplished high school and collegiate wrestler. So like a person could come in with a background in judo or college wrestling, high school wrestling, Sambo, and although they're technically a white belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, be very good and be able to actually defeat higher belts in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So focus on training, don't focus on the tap, and just work on getting better. Don't focus on like, oh, I'm a higher belt and I shouldn't tap to a lower belt. No, just work on your techniques, because it's not important how these taps come out in training. It's like, no, train to get better. Jiu-Jitsu works, and keep in mind that Gary Tonin is an excellent example of tapping out in training. Like Gary is one of the best no-gi grapplers in the world, but Gary will tell you, man, like before he really hit the competition circuit, like he would tap out a lot in training, and he's like, sometimes he would visit schools and people didn't think he was that good until they started seeing him in competition. He was winning competition after competition after competition, and the reason he was doing that was when he spars in training, he's just training. He's working on techniques. He's trying to see what challenges his training partner can bring to him and what things he can do to counter it. So don't get caught up. See, he doesn't get caught up in like whether he can tap you or who gets the tap in training. His game was improve in training, and then in competition, he's smoking everybody. So when you see Gary Tonin, I might be mispronouncing his name, one of the best no-gi grapplers in the world. Like, you would never think, oh, in training he gets tapped all the time, because he's putting himself in bad positions, and his focus is in training where your focus should be, which is getting better. Not, oh, this blue belt tapped me and I'm a brown belt. It's not a big deal, because you're training. Now if you're in competition and a blue belt taps you and you're a brown belt, that's you may want to assess like what happened. But sometimes jiu-jitsu works, and if they catch the submission and they lock it on, and it's a deceptive game, you're thinking, oh, he's trying to go for this, and then he goes for that, and you realize, oh shoot, he's got the submission on. You just tap and you say, we live and learn. I didn't expect it. Surprised me. It was a good chest setup. It worked. So I say all that to say, don't worry about the tap in training. And because if you start worrying about the tapping to junior people in training, what is going to happen is you're going to lose the joy of jiu-jitsu, because instead of you training because you're trying to get better, and like a lot of times I roll and train not because any other reason besides the fact that I just love to train. Like I love the chess match of training, and if I let my ego get involved and like, oh man, like I'm not feeling all up to it today, I'm a little tired, I don't want to take the chance of some lower belt catching me, then jiu-jitsu starts to not be fun for me anymore, because I'm worried about something that means nothing. Like you get no prize for tapping anybody in training. There's no prize for it. It's like, well, your ego feels better, or maybe your training partner ego feels less good, but the end result is you're trying to get better in training. So enjoy training, strive to get better, And don't worry about like, oh, this technique didn't work and that led to me getting tapped. Well, figure out like, why didn't the technique work? Was it you didn't do the technique exactly right? Maybe your timing was off, or maybe your training partner had an excellent counter for that technique, and then be like, what did you do that caused my technique not to work? You know, ask your training partner, because that's one of the advantages of having a great training partner. It's like, I went to try this and it usually works for me, but you did something and it didn't work. You know, was it an accident, or do you know something? And if you have good training partners, they'll share with you, you know, the knowledge that they have. You know, like I was training with one of my blue belts the other day, and I think he was setting up a baseball bat choke, and I tapped him before on an arm press in response to the baseball bat choke. And when he went to do it, I thought, oh, I'm going to tap him again. He didn't learn his lesson last time. To my surprise, he spun around when I went to do the arm press, and like arm barred me. And I'm like, holy crap, I didn't expect that. And I'm like, wow, I thought you didn't learn your lesson the last time we rolled. He did learn his lesson. He learned his lesson. He went to the drawing board and figured out, how can I counter what Saad did? And he did. He countered it beautifully, and he got the tap. And good for him. I'm proud of him, because that shows he's learning and getting better. And it also helps me, because it's like, I know my student is getting better because he's not falling for the same thing that I got him with before. And it helped me identify some flaws in the way that I was getting this arm press in reaction to the baseball bat choke. So it's like, man, it was a win-win for both of us. So I talked on a bit, but that's the answer for this week's question. It doesn't matter if you tap in training. You know, enjoy your training, spar, just to get better. And whatever the outcome is, it's all training. So the outcome doesn't mean anything, you know. And that's why we don't talk about who we tap in training. You know, like if you tap somebody in a tournament or an MMA fight or a street fight, you know, you can talk about that because that was real. Like both of you were given 100%. In training, it's just that. It's training. So train to get better. And we say, for years we've said this in jiu-jitsu, leave your ego at the door. So when you come in, don't worry about the outcome of your rolls. Don't worry about if it looks like, you know, like my jiu-jitsu was garbage today. Worry about, what things can I do to get better? All right. That's the answer to this week's question. If you got any comments, feel free to comment below. And if you got a question for next week, you can either write the question in below or on my Facebook page or when you see me in class. So thank you guys. Look forward to seeing you guys in training soon. All right. Bye now.